see, guys, you are key members of the community. See how many people are here, still here for you? And it wasn't because of John at all.
Touched.
When we were speaking with Dean, you know, Dean wanted to do sort of the state of the investment community, and had said, now we're going to cover off some esports things, some VR things in earlier sessions. But I think what we're going to find here is that the state of the industry certainly encompasses all of that. So, but what I'd like to do to start with is just get your guys' impression. We had a number of really huge acquisitions lately. And yet people talk about the activity in the core gaming space not being at the pace it has been over the past few years. And what do you guys think? Chris, I'll start with you. What do you think about the current state of the investing environment?
So I think we've got a handful of investments in gaming, and a couple would be, I'd call, core development. And we found those to be they ended up mostly taking more money and more time than we thought going in. I think we've tended to look are things that are more on the side of services or enabling technologies that have been helpful to other gaming platforms. So, you know, one example, Clinton and I are investors together in Mob Crush, which is, you know, mobile streaming, which can apply to any game. In fact, PewDiePie this last week was streaming Pokemon Go using Mob Crush, but looking at things like on the edges from that. But in general, it does feel like, and the other challenge we've seen is we're seed stage investors. Our average check is $500,000 or $750K, and just a lot of these core development companies tend to need a lot more money, and so it's been a little bit of a disconnect for us. You know, again, although we've been in some, you know, great gaming platforms like Roblox from the earliest days that we're really pleased to be a part of.
Glenn, are you seeing the same thing?
So we're pretty similar to First Round Capital and to what Chris Fralick does. They're a bigger fund and they do more investments, but we do seed and Series A investments as well, 500,000 to 1.5 million. We're lucky enough to be in Mob Crush with First Round Capital and some other great investors. And also Dan Fiden and I did one of my first investments with Signia and Super Evil Megacorp and Vainglory, which is leading mobile esports right now. Thank you. Good call out.
For that?
Yeah. So we're long gaming, long esports, long, I think, interactive. And we think that we're in some ways, I think, maybe going against the grain. And you won't find too many game investors out there who are just focused on the game industry, because there have been some massive blow-ups, and it's thought of as a hit-driven business. But we think that if you really focus on it, if you really get to know the players out there, and when I mean the players, the really smart people who are developing content, developing distribution, developing and aggregating community, that there's some oversized VC type returns that you can get. And I think some of those examples are Twitch for $1 billion that Amazon acquired. There's Riot Games, Tencent acquired for finally the total amount of about $10 billion. And there's Supercell, around $10 billion as well. And I think if you were to value Niantic right now, I think you would probably figure, what do you think that would be, Chris? What do you think that would be, Martin?
It's off the charts, the numbers I hear anyway for monthly revenue.
If they're doing $10 million a day, that's a pretty huge run rate. I mean, I think that's in the billions of dollars at this stage almost.
So Chris, you talked about enabling technologies, and Dan, you look a lot of investments sort of in companies where you can get a peek into maybe emerging segments of the market. What are you most excited about relationship to that?
Yeah, sure. So you know, I would probably say that I'm somewhat different than both of these guys. I've done a bit more game studio investing, and one of the reasons that I do that, I think, you know, you hear a lot of times investors talk about picks and shovels businesses, but fundamentally, if you're selling picks and shovels, it's not actually a particularly terrific business, highly commoditized. Everybody, can get a hold of a shovel, and it's a margin eroding business. I think even tools businesses in the video game industry are inventing a new tool to do something, and you need to prove that tool out, and usually that's within a product, whether that's your end game or not. You need to build a product to prove out the tool, to kind of eat your own dog food. It's called Unreal Engine for a reason. So we're a little bit more comfortable investing in game studios that have a path toward doing broader businesses like that as well. But I think the kinds of businesses that you're talking about are things like we've done in the streaming ecosystem. We invested in a company called Maestro that's kind of a engagement and monetization platform for streamers. And we think it's a great business and a great CEO, but it also gives us great insight into who the biggest customers are for that business, how they actually engage their users, so that when we invest more deeply in the category, we're going to have a sense of really fundamentally how it works through our experience with them.
Dan, any examples there that where you get a sneak peek?
Yeah, so I mean, Maestro is the streaming company that we did at Funplus. I did a deal at Signia called Grow Mobile, which was pretty similar.
But when you look at Maestro, and I think Ari's a smart guy, I think that's an interesting company. Are you able to see into what they're doing right now and start to pick examples of what might be successful?
It isn't as though I'm digging into their database and kind of looking exactly at the data, but just the being a part of the process of watching Ari kind of grow the business and understanding who his customers are, what his pain points are, and what kinds of features and strategies are really helping his business grow, helps me understand the business much more broadly. I think at the early stage, most of the companies that any of us are investing in are usually inventing what it is that they do in some really broad sense. And the best way to do that is to kind of get your hands into it, make some mistakes, figure out how to change it and move in the next direction. So as an investor, I kind of like to have that level of, as much of that level of kind of practical experience as possible. Which is a little bit difficult to do sometimes as an investor, but I think it's one of the benefits of being early stage.
We followed John Hankey up here, and John has, you know, his look at Niantic and Ingress and Pokemon Go and how that's happened. We were backstage watching the presentation, and I think to a person I've talked to, that the whole phenomenon it's crazy. And you know, I'm pretty familiar with Ingress from a few years ago. I would never. I mean, I think I won't say who it was, but you know, we're back there talking, and it was like John's describing a business that people probably wouldn't invest in as he built that. I mean, how does that impact?
I said it. I'll admit it. It's supposed to be controversial here. Yeah. No, I mean, we all agreed we were going to be controversial, didn't we? Yeah, it's an amazing game. The first time I played the game, I was absolutely delighted, and I have to admit that I really didn't expect to be. I had been through a period working with Rick at Signia where he had made investments in, it must have been 2008, 2009, and a couple of location-based game companies in kind of the first generation of the Mary Meeker, Somolo, or remember that? And there were a lot of game companies out there that had check-in mechanics and really kind of encouraged players to move around a city. And you know, there was Red Robot Labs was my friend Mike's company that made a very cool game, but ultimately it was a really, really tough business. And I think a number of investors I know, I'm not going to kind of like, you know, throw anyone specific under the bus, but I will admit that there were definitely points where it was like, we've already seen that in one or two investments. People just don't want to move around when they're playing their games. So that's like, if that's kind of, you know, a requirement for your game or your business, that's just not going to be interesting to us. We've been down the path and it didn't work. I think that, like, just as a game player for me in Pokemon Go, it totally worked. And I think as a player, I don't know, you know, as an investor, but I think just from 2008, 2009 to today, the notion of kind of like looking at your phone every 3 seconds when you're wandering around, that has been habituated and to such a deeper level that maybe it's just more acceptable to people now. Maybe they've just cracked something really magical in the design, but whatever it is, I think it was a really inspiring moment for me to kind of say, like, you got to stay really humble as an investor and look at everything with new eyes, no matter how many times you feel like you've seen the pattern before, because sometimes people just are able to turn it a little bit and make something magical.
I mean,
I would just add, like, I think we're seeing something it's a phenomenon that's something like was never been witnessed before. Like, just in terms of the volumes of engagement in such an incredibly short period of time. It's a perfect storm, a 20-year overnight success. Where when you hear, and we spoke to him earlier, like, he's been working on this in some form or another, literally for 20 years, and then Ingress, and then it just all came together. But the impact that it has in the real world is like nothing I've ever seen. I was driving through LA with my son yesterday, and he's helping me. Like, we see three kids standing there. He goes, "They're playing Pokemon Go." I'm like, "You're kidding?" And they're standing there holding their skateboards, and they are. And you're seeing them wandering through cities, and they're finding dead bodies in fields, and people are running into cars because they're playing. Like I can't think of anything like this, and it's just amazing, to watch it unfold in the last 30 days.
Is it going to change the way you guys look at what's possible with sort of mobile AR, the marriage of the two?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I mean, we're already starting to see pitches based off of the success of Pokemon Go. So we're seeing startups that are referencing it in their decks and saying, we can become the next Pokemon Go. And I agree with Dan, and I'm going to be humble about it. I don't know if I would have funded Pokemon Go or Niantic like 3 or 4 years ago. I wasn't investing at the time, so I didn't have the opportunity to do it. I just started investing 3 years ago. But I would have thought really hard about it, and I would have looked at all of the creators of all of these great companies by talented people who didn't really make it in location-based gaming. And that being said, I've always been long Nintendo as well, and I've always been a Nintendo fanboy, and I would never bet against Nintendo and against Pokemon, because that is actually the bigger phenomenon, is that it's a 20, 25-year-old IP that's probably one of the top 5 brands in the world, and you can stick Pokemon on most anything and it'll sell.
And it had been starved on mobile. It wasn't there.
That's
like,
right.
It was just literally everything lined up at the same time.
Yeah, I do hope, though, that there had been, I think, over the course of the past 12 months or so, a real movement away on the part of venture investors from mobile. There obviously been a lot of stagnation in the top grossing charts, and it was kind of a marked movement away from mobile. I think the fact that both Clash Royale and Pokemon Go have kind of upset that quite a bit. I hope that reminds investors how much potential there still is in mobile. I think that the potential in mobile is still mostly untapped. And I also hope that we don't draw the wrong conclusion, which is the Clash IP is what made Clash Royale successful, and the Pokemon IP is what made Pokemon Go successful. They definitely were force multipliers, but there is no shortage of big IPs launched every week on mobile. What there have been are shortages of truly innovative, kind of rule-breaking game designs. Clash Royale launched a synchronous multiplayer mobile game when I know a lot of people were just like, can't do synchronous multiplayer on mobile. Like, Super Evil did it, but there are very few examples of truly synchronous multiplayer games, and that game was unapologetically synchronous multiplayer, totally different kind of a game mechanic than most people had seen before. It was an awesome game. Yeah, it had the Clash IP, but the game is amazing. And Pokemon Go, the same thing. I mean, it is Pokemon, but it's a very different mechanic than we'd been seeing for the past 12 months. And so it certainly, I think both of those examples demonstrate how powerful great IP can be when they kind of match up perfectly with a game. But I think they also show that you should still be out there innovating and making kind of truly interesting and new game mechanics.
So we're not going to see a lot of Kardashian mobile games then? Is that
We
is that
have
what you're
enough
saying,
already.
Dan?
I'm not going to be that controversial.
Can we talk about VR AR a bit? I mean, I talk to people, they talk about it's the next, it's almost religious. They talk about it's the next $100 billion industry and the world's going to change. And then I talk to other people and it's like, it's just a different application of entertainment and experiences. But I tend to be in the religious camp a little bit. I can see how it's going to change everything. And I'd be interested in you guys' impressions of how the market grows. We look at the game business, but it's going to, how the market segments. How you know, it's not just content. It's going to be delivery. It's going to be a lot of different things. And I know some of you have specific ideas. We talked about that a bit.
Yeah, so I've been tracking VR since almost 20 years in its early infancy, and probably about the last 18 months, much closer with my investor hat on. And I've kind of built a model that about a year ago I wrote a piece called "Why Mobile Wins First in VR," and just the concept of those Gear VR, a little to some extent cardboard, are kind of good ways to taste and get a good sense of what it can be. I think in the long term, AR wins everything. I think we'll be sitting here, wearing contacts or things that look like Warby Parker glasses that overlay everything you want in front of you. And I think of it, John Hankey said it's kind of a continuum. I think I see the same thing from like, a Pokemon Go through what we think of today as VR all the way into that kind of an AR world. And then I think the head-mounted displays, I think yesterday I heard the term heavy VR is what Jason from Oculus is calling, the Rift and the PlayStation and the Vive, is really impressive. And I think the keys you have to think about as a developer are what are the installed bases going to be for each of those groups and when are they going to hit? Mitch Lasky from Benchmark wrote was quoted last week talking about how there's been some overhype in the cycle and it's going to take longer than anyone thinks. And there's probably some truth to that. Where I become an optimist at the end of the day is the quality of the platforms today that have just recently come out into commercial availability are really good. Like it's a really good starting point. Anyone that gets a great VR demo walks away blown away. And I think it just makes me an optimist for the future.
So it's better than Virtual Boy from the 90s?
Yeah, I have one of those with the glove as well, yeah. And I have Google Glass. I literally have a museum of all the old stuff that's always been out there.
Clinton, you had talked about 3 segments or 3 approaches to the market at one point.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe it'll be helpful. I'm to say that I'm a fanboy and I'm super long VR. I mean, I have been since 1993 when I read Snow Crash and thought, wow, I want to be in this metaverse. When can we get VR? And actually, when Oculus first did its Kickstarter, I actually wanted to invest in it, and it actually got me into VC because I was aced out of my angel investment into Oculus Rift because some VCs kicked me out. Mm-hmm. And I was still COO at Square Enix, and I had so much conviction in it that I was like, well, I got to meet these VC guys. Who are these people who are not letting me invest in Oculus?
Who were they?
Oh, you know.
Never forget.
The usual suspects. But I do believe that VR and AR together and mixed reality are going to be the next $100 billion industry, but it's going to take a good 8 to 10 years before it happens. And we're right now in the first innings of it. And where we are now is pre-iPhone for mobile, I think. I think we're in maybe 2004, 2005, before things really took off in 2008, 2010 for mobile. That's how early it is for us. And that's what Mitch Lasky said as well. Yeah. And if he were here, I was there at that Casual Connect talk, and he said, listen, I mean, I started investing in mobile in 2000. It didn't really take off until 2008. And I think that's where we are as well. We're in an age of BlackBerries and, flip phones right now and Motorola's. Apple hasn't even jumped into it yet with that platonic ideal of what is the best VR experience, what is the best AR experience. And I think when that happens, and there's a real install base of 20 to 25 million, then I think there's going to be some real, I think, wealth generation.
Where do you think's the best opportunity? I mean, recognizing we're early. I mean, is it content? Is it enabling technologies? Is it, I mean, where is it?
One lens I used to think of it is about like when the iPhone was early and the App Store was just about to launch, and thinking like one of a great investor, Chris Dixon from Andreessen Horowitz, says like, imagine you know what the iPhone is going to be and the App Stores, and that's how to look at VR right now. But I think of that analogy a little bit further, where what were the things that were needed around the app stores, or what things did developers need, either to monetize or to do analytics, or to get other distribution, or what do users need from discovery or other things. But thinking about what was needed in the app store model 8 years ago versus what might be needed now.
Yeah, I'll probably look at it from a slightly more content perspective. No surprise to Clinton, I'm sure. I think that heavy VR is from an entertainment perspective, where I'm interested in, mostly because I think that it will be a very, very long time before AR gets there to deliver a satisfactorily compelling entertainment experience, game experience, and I think VR is there now. The problem is it going to be the end of 2018 before there's a really kind of satisfactorily large install base out there? Probably, but making a VR game is fundamentally different grammar than making a flat screen video game. We are absolutely, when I say me, I do not mean me. I mean smart people. We just invested in a company called Stress Level Zero that makes hover junkers. It was a launch 5 title. And our partnership with them is because we believe in that company being able to, in a very scrappy entrepreneurial way, learn how to make a VR game. And I think that it's different than going from Nintendo DS to iPhone or PlayStation to iPhone. Where I put the camera is a fundamentally different exercise. And so my concern is that how am I going to get there in end of 2018 if I'm not in now, right? Maybe that's one iteration cycle. These aren't iPhone games. I mean, these are by nature much more immersive experiences. They're going to take longer development cycles. It's going to be somewhat more expensive to build them. We actually aren't very many releases away from the release that needs to be there at that Christmas or whenever that inflects, right? So that's kind of why we're there now.
Yeah, I think about like deciding though, are you going to build for heavy VR or are you going to go for mobile VR is an important question. And I think a year ago, a lot of developers didn't seem to be articulating much with the differences. And I think like when I think of heavy VR, it kind of reminds me of like the setup and the time, and it's not trivial, it's not easy. The average person couldn't even get a rig set up if you gave it to them. But it's kind of like the home theater I had in 1998 or 99, or like, the giant Sony TV, the $2,000 DVD player, and people would come over and and try it out. And then eventually in 10 years, it's almost free or built into everything you have. I think on the mobile side, I get really excited about the mobile side because I think like Gear VR is very good right now and Samsung's committed to it. I think Google is bringing a ton of resources to making something really work beautifully fast, affordable. It'll work on every phone they have. If you believe what Apple's doing, it'll be in AR and probably tied to a smartphone. And so I think that category will be amazing and in the tens of millions, in a few year time frame where you could reasonably say that. And I think people will have headsets like they have headphones today. You get a phone, it comes with a cheap free one. You might buy a pair of Beats or an equivalent to have at home, and another one that you travel with or pick up at the airport. And that's where I think that side of it will go.
Clinton, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, as an early stage investor, we just look for great teams to back. I mean, we look for guys, exactly like what Dan said, who are going to be around in another few years and going to course correct and be able to figure it out. And so we back those people who we think can survive that. And I think there's going to be a trough of disillusionment over the next year when VR doesn't take off the way that we think it is. And we need to find those people who are going to be able to be scrappy enough and be cost efficient enough to be able to survive that, be able to learn enough, be able to fail fast, and then go on to succeed. A lot like what Niantic did. Took them 20 years. Those are the kind of people that we need to find. And so if you say, well, where are the real opportunities? It's in finding the super talented technical teams who are able to get there. And I think that's it. I mean, you're making those bets. Have you made an investment yet, Chris, in VR?
Ink is still drying, but yes.
Congrats. I still have not publicly announced any investments in VR, but we're going to get there. And we're looking for those people. Yeah.
So a couple of minutes. You know, the greatest values always realized when you solve a big problem. And what do you guys see as the sort of big problems within our ecosystem that need to be solved?
I think that right now the two things that bother me most, I think are the biggest problems out there, is curation in mobile. I think that it's an incredibly important video game platform. It is the most widely proliferated video game platform that's ever existed. And it's, in many ways, the most accessible to developers. That's a combination of the way that platforms are run and the development tools that are available now. But curation is, and content discovery for users is really deeply broken. And there are amazing games out there, and I think that people just aren't finding them. So I'm spending a lot of time in that right now. I also think that innovation within free-to-play is totally broken. I think that people have stagnated in the way that they think about what free-to-play really means within video games, and they're being very prescriptive. They're kind of following a playbook, and I don't think that's healthy. I think that there's a lot of opportunity to do kind of radically different things that are not premium pricing and are not free-to-play as it exists today. So those are two for me.
So I think one of the biggest problems is that the games industry and games themselves and gamers aren't sexy enough yet.
Speak
They're
for
not
yourself,
sexy enough.
Clinton.
Come on, I'm not, like, present company excluded. But you know, all other industries in entertainment are in some ways sexy. And I think esports is just starting to crack the code, where you're starting to have some narratives around heroes and around, you know, athletes and sports stars who are sexy. And I think that's starting to really, I think, bring gaming more mainstream. And I think esports, I think mobile, I think what Pokemon has done, I think it's starting to make things a little bit more, I think, acceptable to be a gamer, acceptable to follow esports. And I mean, that's why I'm an investor in esports as well, is I'm starting to see that trend.
And Clint, it's a good point, because I think sometimes, I've been in the industry a long time, I think sometimes we don't pat ourselves on the back well enough. We don't take ourselves seriously enough. We build great businesses, we make money, we make great content, and yet I see the other entertainment businesses really celebrating how good they are.
Yeah.
And yeah, we could do a better job of that.
I would echo Dan's observation about discovery is the biggest, most broken problem I can think of, and it actually, it's disappointing to me that these new app stores, or particularly like Oculus store, isn't better, or the Gear VR store. Like, there's only 200 or 300 games, and I can't find the good stuff, or even sometimes find my own stuff, and there's not ratings in some of them. Like, I think they should be rethinking that on the way up. I think on the opportunity side, one thing, we were at a lunch conversation, was just talking about what a big opportunity spectating has become. I've certainly seen it with Twitch, we're seeing it with esports, and someone like posed a thought experiment, like in 2020, could you know, there'd be more monetization from spectating than playing. And I don't know how, but I have a sense that that actually is a real possibility and gets into how do you do new ways of monetizing and everybody wins. So that's pretty exciting to me.
Cool. I think we're out of time. The patio beckons, I think, for everybody. Thank you very much, and I appreciate everybody's attention.